What's going on? Cody McBroom here, CEO of Tailored Coaching Method. Welcome to another educational video. Today we're going to talk about training variation. So this can kind of be your training variation 101 course, right? I want to deep dive into programming and building your training program, but teaching you what the sweet spot of training variation really is. If we switch training up too often, it's detrimental. We need to stick with something for long enough to progress, but if we don't change it often enough, we're not creating enough of a novelty stimulus that's a new stressor on the muscle, and we might just get really bored. We know the most important thing for training consistently over time and longevity in the gym is to avoid boredom. It's to keep motivated, keep yourself challenged and engaged and consistent in the gym. And we cannot do that if we're just straight up getting tired of our programming. There's quite a few different topics that we want to cover today because we have to consider what is most optimal for your physique, what is most optimal for strength, what is most optimal for neural adaptations, and what is most optimal for keeping you in the gym, both mentally and physically, by reducing or avoiding injuries. And today I want to break that down with a really easy to use scale to teach you where you're in your training career and how you should use training variation to your advantage to get the best results possible. So let's get into it. All right, so the first thing we have to cover in today's video is your training age. See, training age determines how experienced you are in the gym. So when I say, what is your training age? Typically what I'm looking for is one of two answers. Either A, I have been training for blank amount of years, whether that is 1, 3, 5, 10, doesn't matter, just amount of years you've been training. And I'm also looking for, are you a beginner, an intermediate, and advanced? And in most circumstances, people associate the number of years they've been training with how experienced they are in the gym, being you are either a beginner if you've been training for 1 to 3 years, an intermediate if you've been training for 3 to 5 years, and an advanced lifting if you've been training 6+ years. That's kind of the general concept most people talk about. However, the problem here gets to the point where we have genetic anomalies or previous athletes who are new to lifting but have high body awareness, which is something I'm going to talk a lot about today because that determines training variation quite a bit. The person I'm talking about is pretty simple. They have an athletic background. They've been training since they were 5 years old. They just started lifting this year. Technically, they are a beginner, but by the end of that first year of lifting weights, they are a pro. They are so good at lifting weights. They are great at activating muscles. They have a good mind-muscle connection, and they are performing and progressing in the gym like an advanced lifter would. The problem here is simple. They've only been training for 1 year, so they are classified as a beginner, but because of their athletic and genetic past in history and their skills of actually lifting in the gym, they're going to make the same level of adaptations as an advanced lifter would, which is not very fast. Anybody knows newbie gains come quick. If you're truly in your first year of exercise and lifting, you're gonna make gains rapidly. If you're in your 5th+ year, they're gonna be pretty damn slow. And I'd have you consider that somebody who has a very athletic background or great genetic potential might reach that point much sooner than the average person walking out of the gym that has never lifted or had any athlete-based training in their past or played any sports in their past. So we have to understand that there's this difference. Now, I wanna show you the scale that I tend to use when I consider training variation. And I'm gonna show you where the training variation increases based on your training age, and then we're gonna dive into exactly why that is. But as you can see here, this training scale is pretty simple. When you're a beginner, you need less variation. The reason you need less variation is because you need time to adapt more. You are less adapted because you've been training for less amount of time. So it's probably better to stick with things for an extended period of time, have longer microcycles and mesocycles, and really spend time trying to progress with the exercises you're using before you change them up into the next plan with increasing your training variation. An intermediate is going to be in the middle, and you're going to have a moderate amount of variation, enough variation to stimulate your mind and keep you engaged, but not so much that you don't have enough time to progress in the gym, because we know the more you change things, the harder it is to progress when you're closer to that beginner stage. And then the last stage is an advanced lifter who actually has the right, they have earned the right to use more training variation within their program design because they understand how the body works on a deeper level. And that is what we're going to explain today, is those 3 steps and how you can determine 1, which one you are in, and 2, how many weeks you should go with a specific exercise before changing it to a new exercise, i.e. higher training variation frequency, based on how long you've been training and how experienced you actually are. So when we consider this beginner stage, we'll start there on the scale of beginner to advanced and how often you should change. One of the main reasons that we need to make sure a beginner has less training variation, and that means less exercise variations. I'm not changing exercise in and out as frequently, which to some might be boring, but not to take a shot at CrossFit, but this is one of the biggest issues with CrossFit and why people get so distraught and confused when they're not experiencing a lot of aesthetic or body composition changes by doing CrossFit, especially early in their career. It's because there's too much variation. Every day you walk in the gym, every week you walk into the gym, it's a different program. It's changing every single week. That is not enough time to progressively overload something because you are completely eliminating what's called the repeated bout effect, which is the idea in this concept of if we repeat something, we get a skill to do that thing. If we become more skilled at that thing, we can load that thing and progressively overload that thing. And when we progressively overload anything in the gym, that's how we build muscle, that's how we change our body composition, and that's how we get stronger, period. One of the main reasons for this and why it's so important for newbies, people who are in the beginning stages of their training career, to stick with something for longer is because of this neural adaptation effect. So if we consider the graph that we're gonna pull up on the screen, the neurological adaptation here, our nervous system is controlling our muscular system, and our muscular system is manipulating our skeletal system. And that sounds very confusing and complicated, but essentially what it is our nervous system is telling our muscles to move our joints, right? So if our nervous system is telling our muscles to move the joints in a way that places stress on the muscle, that is where we are going to build muscle, because that's how we go through a full range of motion on a curl. My mind and my nervous system are telling my muscles to power my joints to do this movement. And because of that, I'm going to flex my bicep, create tension in the muscle, and hopefully over time it's going to build. And that's how we build muscle. The reason this is so important for beginners to understand is because they don't have this system down. Their body isn't properly doing this. It's not doing this on demand. I've been training for over 10 years, every single week in the gym. My body is accustomed and aware of how to fire the muscles and get the joints to move properly to build muscle, which means I can create tension and overload on the muscular system far more effectively and efficiently than a new beginner. What this means for a newbie is we need to be less aggressive with training variation. We actually need less training variation overall. Because if we spend more time doing a movement, let's say a row, a dumbbell row, we can practice the movement. We can practice the mechanics of letting our scapula glide forward, then retracting our scapula, then rowing our arm back, and in knowing too, do I want my elbow high to fire more of my upper back, my rear delt, my rhomboid, my trap, or do I want to place my elbow low, keep my scapula depressed, and fire my lats? How would you even know if you don't know, one, body awareness and cues to get the mechanics of your body moving properly, and two, what muscles feel like when they fire? You wouldn't know if you're a beginner. So one of the main reasons we need to stick with a movement for longer, and I'll explain exactly the timeline for each of these categories of training age very soon. The reason we need to stick with this for longer with the beginner is purely because of the neural adaptation effect. We need to focus on motor unit recruitment and our body's ability to get better at these skills. It's called skill acquisition. It's the process of improving our movement ability through a full range of motion to fire the proper muscles. And this doesn't happen the first time you train a muscle. That's why week one, it's very ineffective. We need to get used to the movement. Week two, we can start to create some tension. Week three, we can actually overload it. And then week 4, 5, 6, if we're gonna stick with it, we can really start to build on top of that and start progressively overloading this movement pattern. But only once we spend the time getting neurologically adapted to the movement patterns, and that's the main reason why beginners need to stick with an exercise for a little bit longer. So that covers the beginner trainee who is trying to neurologically improve its efficiency, recruit more motor units, build skill acquisition, and improve their movement patterns. Moving on to the intermediate, they're not far ahead from that, but they are starting to have a better neurological sense of how to fire muscles and adapt properly, which means they don't need to spend as long doing each exercise sequentially week after week. With these individuals, they're obviously in the middle of an advanced and a beginning athlete, which means that they still need to spend time. The repeated bout effect is still important. And for some movement patterns, it is still important to make sure that they are focusing on the repeated bout effect and this neural adaptation. For example, somebody might be great with the squat, so we can create more variation within the squat because it just clicks with them. It's a natural movement pattern that they really gravitate towards and can learn very easily. We all remember those students in math class or science class or whatever class that just got it. It was almost like they just knew already, where you're confused, you don't know how to add or subtract or multiply or do anything if you're like me. And these other students are just getting it really quickly. And then we go into English, a different class, and they don't get it, and you do. Why is that? Well, it's because you naturally gravitate towards English and it just clicks with you. It's a natural environment and thing for you to learn. For some people, that's the squat, it's the deadlift, it's the press, but it's not the row or the lunge or something else. So as an intermediate, this is where you need to start paying attention and taking notes of which exercises you just have down pat. You just know how to do them. You feel the muscles working really well. There's no doubt about it. You can take it further to exhaustion and you can really apply a lot of stress in the muscle. And it's important to track these things as a beginner or an intermediate, because a lot of times people forget about their training log or journals that are going to teach them what is working and what's not. As an intermediate lifter, you're still close enough to being a beginner where you need to focus on certain exercises a little bit longer, and those should be your staples that stay week after week, and sometimes mesocycle after mesocycle, which means block after block. So if you have a 4-week program, it means that it's sticking in there 4 weeks after 4 weeks after 4 weeks, whereas some exercises might change every 4 weeks. It's all dependent on what you gravitate naturally to and you better understand and how to activate your muscles with. Along those lines is just simple body awareness. And as we get into the advanced individual, this becomes more and more of a common thing, but you'll still experience it with the intermediate lifter. For the advanced lifter, we're clearly much further down the line. We've had more years in the gym, we have more experience with a wider variety of exercises, which means we actually have the right to create more training variation. This is why, going back to CrossFit, some of the best CrossFit athletes prior to were athletes in a different realm. They were Olympic lifters or bodybuilders or people who did a wide variety of exercises for a long period of time before getting into a sport that changes the exercise every week. The reason they advance faster and get less injured in that process is because they know how to push themselves to the maximum in those exercises without having to spend weeks practicing. If you are fully neurologically adapted to lifting, if you know how to fire the muscles, get amped up, and take yourself from 0 to 100, RPE 0 to 10, leave no reps in the tank, truly go to failure. If you truly know how to do these things and you are an advanced individual, you don't need to spend as many weeks doing an exercise, because you can throw in a new exercise this week that you haven't done in years, and you know how to do it, you know what weight to use, and you know how to fire the right muscles as hard as possible to do that exercise. Now, that doesn't mean you need to change exercise every week, but it gives you the right to do so. And this is where we have to find this good balance. A good example of this, I am an advanced lifter. I've been lifting for over a decade, and I can do that with most exercises. Unless it's a weird exercise using Bosu balls and chains and bands and stuff that I'm never gonna do anyway, I'm gonna know how to execute it effectively at my maximum threshold almost regardless. And what that allows me to do is throw in a new exercise and stimulate my muscles, fire my nervous system, and go through it with proper execution to avoid injury, taking myself to maximum efforts without needing weeks of building up. However, there's certain exercises that I still don't feel fully confident or that it is fully necessary to take to failure, and I have room to grow. A good example of this is a dumbbell bench press. A flat dumbbell bench press for me is the best chest exercise. And as an advanced lifter, I have the body awareness to know how I feel doing it. I can feel the stretch. I feel like my shoulders are in a good position. They never ache. My elbows never hurt. I get a great pump, and I can still push progressive overload every few weeks to add some weight on that flat dumbbell bench if I stay within a certain rep range, say 5 to 10. Because of that, I'm always gonna keep it around. It's clearly a great exercise. The stimulus to fatigue ratio is amazing. It's not an overly fatiguing exercise that's gonna drain me for days or leave me super sore, but it's very stimulating and it really gets my muscles going and it makes me feel pumped. And I have room to go and build strength in this. It's not a curl. A dumbbell curl, I'm not adding any weight to, but a dumbbell bench press, I can add weight to that, especially if I start with 10 reps and then I go 8 and then 6 and then 4 and then come back up to 10, and I do a linear progression like a typical program. So because of that reason, I have the right to change it to a floor press and an incline press and then a single arm press and do whatever I want, but instead I have room to grow and I'm gonna keep it. There's a sort of intelligence that you need to develop with your body awareness and keep things around. The other side of this is there's certain exercises that I don't need to progress any further, I can't progress any further, or I would get injured if I kept trying to progress further because of prior issues, so I'm gonna change those more regularly. A good example of this is a dumbbell lateral raise or a curl. I am totally fine changing these every 1 to 2 weeks for myself because I've maxed out my lateral raises. I can add reps, I can do different variations, but I'm gonna have more fun and I'm gonna get a greater stimulus out of doing different variations by incorporating new things that create a novelty, so it's a change and that applies a new stress on the muscle out of those isolation exercises compared to trying to add weight and hurting my elbow in the process. And Then the other side of it is something like a squat or a deadlift for me right now. I have had low back issues for a long time, and I've been experiencing those recently. So instead of me doing a squat over and over and over again, now that my back's feeling better, I'm going to do different variations of squats to avoid an overuse injury. Because I can put weight on the bar and I can get to my RPE 8, 9, or 10, however hard I want to push it with any variation of squat, because I've done them all many times. I don't need to progress to get to that point. But I know if I do a back squat week after week after week at high loads, I will hurt my back. So instead, I'll do a back squat, then a front squat, then a Zercher squat, then a split squat, then a box squat. And then after 6 weeks, I'll come back to the back squat, which is very similar to the West Side Conjugate method. These are powerlifters who were world record holder powerlifters, some of the strongest men in the world. The reason they changed their compound max effort lift every single week is because they were very experienced and they were using massive loads for their body type, which allowed them to avoid injury and still get stronger because of this novelty stimulus and taking it to a high threshold towards failure without repeating it and getting injured. So to conclude this entire video, as we go through this process, we learned that as a beginner, you need less variation and you need to stick with exercises more often, because that's what's ultimately going to allow you to use this repeated bout effect theory, which is the idea of doing the same thing week after week, so you build skills and the neurological adaptations required to progressively overload it. Then we have intermediates who need to be selective. Some exercises you're going to be natural with, you can use more variation and change them more frequently. Other exercises you're still kind of on that newbie phase and you still have some neurological adapting and skill acquisition building to do, and therefore you need to keep those around longer. And then an advanced athlete is going to be able to vary things more often across the board. However, they should stick with certain exercises block after block that have a great stimulus to fatigue ratio, so high stimulus, low fatigue that lingers for days, and are safe for you to repeat without getting injured and still progressively overload with. So the thing to remember with this, as I take you through this application point, this last little bit I'm going to talk to you about is basically what now? How many weeks should you do with a given exercise depending on your training age and the type of exercise you have in your program? The thing to remember with this is everything is individual. So it truly depends. So I can't say for sure that you need to stick with this for exactly 4 weeks. However, if you use these general ranges I'm about to give you and you just follow what I just talked about this entire video with the stimulus to fatigue, injury prevention, neural adaptation, so on and so forth, everything I've covered today, if you keep that in the back of your mind while you're determining how long to stay in these different exercise variations without changing them or when changing them, I think you're going to be great off and you're going to be able to design a program for yourself that's really, really intelligent and progressive. So the first one's a beginner. A beginner should most likely stay with their compound lift. This is going to be your bench, squat, deadlift, or whatever variation of those that you are typically following a linear progression with, which means as you go through the weeks, your volume is dropping and your intensity is increasing, right? We go from 4 sets of 8 week 1 at 200 pounds to 4 sets of 6 week 2 at 205 or 210 pounds, and then 4 sets of 4 week 3 with 220 pounds, right? So we're doing less reps, less volume, but more load, higher intensity. That's a classic linear progression. Then you cycle back. It's a really simple, smart way to build strength that's almost guaranteed to get you stronger. So 4 to 12 weeks is where we're going to stay with this for those compound lifts. And the reason being is because the bench, squat, deadlift, and I would throw an overhead press in there, they truly are lifts that require skill. There's a lot of skill in that compared to a curl or a dumbbell row. And because of that, you want to, as a beginner, stay with those for longer and allow those neural adaptations I talked about to occur. And you're really, really leaning on this repeated bout effect with those. Those are your compound, your base building exercises. Those don't go anywhere for a long period of time. And after 4 to 12 weeks, and I say 4 to 12 is a big range. Usually for beginners, it's 8 to 12, but at least 4 weeks, stick with that same exercise. Ideally 8 to 12. After that period of time, when you're ready, simply change the movement and keep doing exactly what you're doing. So if you're following a linear progression with the bench, squat, and deadlift, you're doing a conventional style bench, squat, deadlift. After this 3-month block, this 12 weeks of you following that progression, you're ready for a change. At that point, you would go with a barbell floor press or a neutral grip press or an incline press. You would go with a trap bar deadlift or a sumo deadlift. And you would go with a front squat or a box squat. All you're doing is making a slight variation change and keeping the compound lift. You're still squatting, you're still pressing, you're still hip hinging, which is a deadlift. After that, we have accessory work. Your accessory work as a beginner should change every 4 to 8 weeks. So this is every 1 to 2 blocks. The big key with this, and really everything, is if you're progressing, you don't have to change anything. So if you get through your first 4-week block of the program and you're still progressing on your dumbbell Bulgarian split squat for 8 reps, just keep it. Milk that as long as you can. Shit, if you can go past 8 weeks, keep going. There's no reason to change it. You are making progress. Don't fix what's not broken. However, typically the safest range for both seeing progression, milking it as long as you can, avoiding injury, and most importantly, not getting bored, because after a while you get bored of doing the same Bulgarian split squat month after month. 4 to 8 weeks is kind of your sweet spot for the accessory work. And this is everything that falls after the compound lift that is not direct isolation work. Your isolation work should be changed every 2 to 4 weeks. These are the things that are at the end of your program. These are the things that you know damn well you're not going to be adding much weight to. Your dumbbell curl, your dumbbell lateral raise, your single leg, foot raised, elevated deficit hip thrust, like really tricky isolation exercises that hit that part of your glute that just makes you twinge. You're not going to be progressing that for long, and you're probably going to get bored. It's fun at first. Do it for 2 to 4 weeks, switch it up. Keep the movement pattern, change the variation. So I'm still doing a curl, but I might go from a barbell curl to a dumbbell curl to a hammer curl to a cable curl to a TRX curl. There's a million curls. Every 2 to 4 weeks, change your isolation work. So now as a beginner, we have 4 to 12 weeks, ideally 8 to 12 for your compound. We have 4 to 8 weeks for your accessory work, and then we have 2 to 4 weeks for your isolation work. Moving on to the intermediate athlete, we have 4 to 8 weeks for your compound lifts. So everything I just talked about, same exact thing, just one notch down. For your compound lifts, you still want the repeated bout effect. You still want to focus on progressive overload. We're going to keep those for 1 to 2 blocks or 4 to 8 weeks total. Accessory work is going to be 3 to 6 weeks. So again, we're just dropping it about 1 to 2 weeks total in that range, but 3 to 6 weeks is a good amount of time to make progress on a lunge or a split squat or a row or anything like that. But beyond 6 weeks, most intermediates start to not progress any further with their one-arm dumbbell row for 8 reps, and they get kind of bored. So change it to a one-arm cable row or change it to a horizontal pull that's bilateral instead of unilateral. Something simple, but again, 3 to 6 weeks for accessories. Last but not least, isolation work for intermediate athletes should be 2 to 3 weeks. So still around that same range, not much different than the beginner, but a little bit less. Like after 3 weeks, most people are getting bored. Most of the clientele that we work with at Tailored Coaching Method and most of the people that experience the Tailored Trainer app, which is providing daily workouts, most of the blocks run in 3-week cycles for this exact reason. 3 weeks is a great progression scheme that allows progress to be made, but doesn't get stale and boring. And that's for beginners, intermediates, and advanced. However, we split it up into different programs, so we make sure that the program's progressive model matches your goals and your experience level. The last category, advanced lifters, as you probably guessed, even less. So compound lifts should be changed every 1 to 4 weeks. Most people who still have a lot of room to grow in strength of the power lifts, bench squat, deadlift, you should keep that lift variation for 4 weeks. Max that timeline out. But if you've almost reached your genetic ability, you have past injuries, you're prone to injuries in general, whatever it may be, go closer to the 1 week and rotate those compound lifts, keeping the movement pattern. So again, I might do a squat. If my goal is hypertrophy, I might do a squat in the 6 to 8 rep range for my compound lift every week, but I'm going to change out that squat to avoid overuse injury and keep it exciting because I'm an advanced lifter. I've done this plenty of times. And again, I can max out that squat in 1 session. Next, we have accessory work, and that's going to be every 2 to 4 weeks. So again, just a little bit smaller. Every couple weeks, you're changing out accessory, no more than 4 weeks, because I don't know many advanced lifters who are going to progressively overload their dumbbell reverse lunge for 8 reps after 4 weeks. It's damn near impossible unless it's a brand new exercise. I would switch them out every 2 to 4 weeks. Again, that 3-week mark being kind of the sweet spot. And then last but not least, isolation work. It's going to be 1 to 3 weeks. So as an advanced lifter, you almost want to change the compound lifts more frequently to avoid injury if you're getting close to your genetic capacity of strength. Your isolation work the most frequently because you're so experienced that you can stress the muscle maximally with any type of isolation exercise because you have the body awareness and the skill of lifting acquired already. And then the accessory work's kind of in the middle because it's very unlikely you're going to get injured, but you still have some room to grow in those, so you keep those for around 2 to 4 weeks. And that's a wrap. That is Training Variation 101. I hope you guys got a lot out of this. This is something that I've developed and thought of and really come up with after a decade of coaching people and writing programs and testing things out. I've ran through so many different programs, and there's so many different answers to the question of how many weeks should a mesocycle be? How many weeks should each training program or training block be? And the truth is there's no perfect answer. There's study after study that shows you should stay with it longer for this repeated bout effect. There's study after study that says you can be flexible with your exercise selection as long as you are stimulating the muscle maximally and you are hitting these key fundamental movement patterns. And because of this back and forth of the research, we really have to rely on experience to tell us what is the best. In my opinion, The sweet spot is 3 weeks, but if you use these ranges I've explained today, I truly think you're gonna be better off in your programming for you and your clients. So I hope you got a lot out of this video. If you enjoyed this video, do me a huge favor. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. We're gonna be dropping more educational videos like this. And I also wanna make sure you like the video. Comment below if you have any questions based on what I'm talking about today, and share it with a friend. If you enjoyed this, you can share it with a friend. Make sure they're learning with you and we're growing this channel together. I'll catch you guys next time.